Book 5, Chapter 1, Part 1 of The Adventures of Gil Blas of Santillane by Alain René Lesage, translated by Tobias Smollett. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Book 5, Chapter 1, Part 1, History of Don Raphael. I made my entrance on the stage of life at Madrid, where my mother was an actress, famous for dramatic, and infamous for her intriguing talents. Her name was Lucinda. As for my father, every man must have one, but my arithmetic is too scanty to determine the number of mine. It might indeed be a matter of history that such or such a man of fashion was dangling after my mother at the epoch of my arrival in this system, but then that mere fact would by no means warrant a deduction that any individual gallant of the mother must therefore be the father of the child. A lady so eminent as she was in so notorious and wholesale a profession must have many strings to her bow. Where her blandishments are most publicly lavished, her favours are most sparingly bestowed. There is a show article or two for public exhibition, but her everyday wares are cheap and hackneyed to the meanest purchaser. There is nothing like taking scandal by the beard, and treating the opinion of the world with heroic indifference. Lucinda, instead of cooping me up in a garret at home, made no scruple about owning her little bastard, but took me in her hand to the theatre with a modest assurance, regardless how the tongue of rumour might babble at her expense, or how the laugh of malice might peal at my unlucky appearance. In short, I was her pet, and came in for the caresses of all the men who frequented the house. One would have sworn that nature pleaded in my favour, and inspired each of them with a father's pride in the brat they had clubbed for. The 12 first years of my life were suffered to waste away in all kinds of frivolous amusements. Scarcely did they teach me to read and write. Still less was it thought of any consequence to initiate me in the principles of my religion. To dance, to sing, to play on the guitar was the sum total of my early attainments. With these gifts and graces for my only acquisitions, the Marquis of Leganez asked for me to be about his only son, who was nearly of my own age. Lucinda gave her consent without reluctance, and it was then that I began to mind a little what I was about. Young Leganez could not reproach me with my ignorance. His little lordship was not cast in a scientific mould, for he scarcely knew a letter of his alphabet, though he had been under private tuition for 15 months. None of his masters could make anything of him. Patience was never formed to engage in so unequal a match. To be sure, they were expressly forbid to exercise any severity on his noble carcass. Their orders were to teach, not to torture him. And this tender precaution, acting on a subject of insufferably untoward dispositions, was the means of throwing to the dogs all the mental physic they poured in. He would none of it. But the verb grinder engendered in his noddle a most ingenious device, by which to keep this troublesome young lordling in awe without trenching on his foolish father's injunctions. This scheme was no other than to flog me whenever that scapegrace Leganez had incurred the penalty of the rod, and this vicarious execution was inflicted with the utmost rigour. My consent to the transfer had never been asked, and there was nothing in the act itself to recommend it, so that my only chance was to run away, and appeal to my mother against so arbitrary a discipline. However her maternal feelings might inwardly revolt, no trace of woman's weakness could be detected in her manner of receiving my complaint. The Leganez connection was too important to be lost for a few whippings, and away went she, dragging her culprit into the presence of his tormentor, who by this act of hers became master of Broomfield. Experience had convinced him that the success of his invention corresponded with its felicity. He therefore went on improving the mind and manners of the little grandee at the expense of my skin. Remorse for his delinquencies was to be excited only by sympathy, so that whenever it became necessary to make a bloody example, my seat of vengeance was firked most unmercifully. The running account between young Leganez and me was all on one side, and scarcely a day passed but he sinned on tick and suffered by attorney. By the nearest calculation of whole numbers, there went somewhere about 100 cuts to teach him each single letter of the alphabet, so that if you multiply 100 by 24 for stupidity, and add an O to the amount for moral offences, you will have the sum total of the belabouring that his education cost me. This thick and threefold companionship with Birch was not the only rub. My path through this family was more beset with thorns than sweetened by flowers. As my birth and connections were no secret, the whole of the establishment, to the very refuse of the household, the stable boys and scullions, twitted me with my shameful origin. This stuck so terribly in my throat that I made my escape once more, but not without borrowing my tutor's ready money, amounting to upwards of 150 ducats, for an indefinite period, and without interest. Thus was the account settled between us. Since he had made a property of my hide for a scarecrow, it was but fair that I should have a finger in the earnings of his arm. For a first attempt at thieving, both the plan and execution were hopeful. A hue and cry was raised for 2 days. It was hot while it lasted, but I lay snug, and they missed me. Madrid was no longer a fit hiding place, so I took to cover in Toledo, and the hounds were thrown out. I was just then entering into my 15th year. What a happy fellow, at such an early age, to shape my own conduct, and be in a condition of forming a set of morals for myself. I soon scraped acquaintance with some pleasant youths, who rescued me from the dominion of prejudice, and shared liberally with me in the sin of spending what was not my own. By degrees I rose in society, and leagued myself with a set of professional sharpers, who found me so fine a subject to work upon, that a short time with plenty of practice put me in possession of all the most desperate jobs. At the expiration of 5 years, an itch for travelling laid hold of me. I therefore took leave of my comrades, and got as far as Alcantara, wishing to commence my peregrinations with the province of Estremadura. In this, my first excursion, an opportunity of keeping in my hand occurred, and I was too diligent a practitioner to let it escape. As I was on foot, and loaded moreover with a pretty heavy knapsack, I halted from time to time to avail myself of the shade, and recruit a little under the trees which lined the highway. At one of these baits I picked up 2 young gentlemen, who were chatting at their ease upon the grass, and inhaling the freshness of the breeze. My mode of accosting them was suited to the occasion, nor did its familiarity seem to be taken in ill part. The eldest could not be more than 15, a couple of as practicable greenhorns as ever fell into the hands of a man of genius. Courteous stranger, said the youngest, we are the sons of 2 rich citizens at Placentia. Longing extremely to see the kingdom of Portugal, we have each of us begged 100 pistoles from our friends, and are setting out to satisfy our curiosity. Travelling on foot as we do, we shall be able to get a good way with that supply, shall we not? What do you think of it? If I had as much, answered I, they might take me who could catch me. I would scour over the 4 known quarters of the globe, and then set out on new discoveries. Fire and fury, 200 pistoles, why it is an entail for a dukedom. You ought to lay by out of the interest. If it is agreeable to you, gentlemen, I will club with you as far as Almeria, whither I am going to take possession of an estate left me by an uncle who was settled there for 20 years or upwards. My young cockneys testified at once the pleasure they should derive from my company. Whereupon, when we were all three a little refreshed, we trudged on towards Alcantara, where we arrived early in the afternoon. No inn but the best was fit to hold such guests. We asked for a room, and were shown into one where there was a press with a good strong lock upon it. Supper was ordered without delay, but as some time was required to get it ready, I proposed to my travelling companions a gentle saunter about the town. The party seemed perfectly agreeable. We locked up our knapsacks in the press, the key of which one of the citizens put in his pocket, and out sallied we from the inn. The churches were the best lions we met with in our way, and while we were gaping about the principal, I pretended to have recollected on a sudden some very urgent business. Gentlemen, said I to my companions, it has just come across me that a good man of Toledo gave me a commission to say 2 words on his behalf to a merchant who lives hard by this church. Have the goodness to wait for me here, I will be back in a moment. With this excuse I went off like a shot in the direction of our inn. The press was my point of attack. I forced the lock, ransacked the baggage of my young citizens, and laid a sacrilegious hand on their pistoles. Poor youths! How they were to pay their reckoning it was not for me to presume even to guess, for most assuredly I stripped them of all the natural means. After this feat I decamped as expeditiously as my legs could carry me from the town, and took the direction of Merida, without caring a curse what became of the young brood I had plucked. Such a windfall as this placed me in a condition of travelling merrily, though in the very blush of youth a certain forecast was not wanting to carry me discreetly through the world, and keep my head above water. It must be admitted without question that I was a youth of forward parts for my age, and unfettered by the prejudices of innocence. I determined to buy a mule, and cheapened one at the first market town. My knapsack was metamorphosed into a portmanteau, and by degrees I began to put on the man of consequence. On the 3rd day a man came across me singing vespers with lungs like a pair of bellows on the highway. By his air he seemed to be a musician of the church establishment, and I accosted him accordingly. Well done, my holy howler of the hallelujahs! You sing your penitential ditties at a good jovial pitch. To all appearance you sol fa with your whole heart and soul. Good sir, replied he, I belong, with your good leave, to the musical department of the Catholic Church, and it is my common practice to keep my devotion and my wind in play by the rehearsal of an anthem or two as I travel along the road. With this disposition to be sociable, we soon got into conversation. It was clear to me that I had fallen in with a character not to be despised in point of shrewdness, nor indisposed to society and merriment. He was 4 or 25. My companion being on foot, I slackened my pace for the pleasure of chatting with him. Among other things, we talked about Toledo. I am perfectly well acquainted with that city, said the brazen-lunged torturer of anthems. It was my residence for a considerable time, and my connections there are not altogether contemptible. And in what part of the town, interrupted I, did you reside? In the New Street, was his answer. I was hand in glove with Don Vincent de Buenagara, Don Matias de Cordello, and 2 or 3 other gentlemen of very considerable fashion. We lived together, took our meals at the same mess, and in short were scarcely ever asunder. It was a charming society. This avowal was no small surprise to me, for it is to be understood that the gentlemen whose names he cited with so pompous an air were the very sharpers with whom I had been affiliated at Toledo. Why, thou degenerate vicar choral, exclaimed I, these fine blades of whom thou hast been boasting are among the number of my acquaintance also, for I too have lived with them in the New Street. We were hand in glove, took our meals at the same mess, and in short were scarcely ever asunder. You are a wag, replied he, with a knowing wink, that is to say, you got into the gang 3 years ago, when I left it. My motive for quitting such a worshipful fraternity, resumed I, was an itch for travelling. I mean to make the tour of Spain. A little more knowledge of the world will make me quite another thing. Doubtless, said he, there is no possible way but travelling to rub off the rust, or bring wit, talent, and address to perfection. It is for the self-same reason that I too turn my back upon Toledo, though the time glided away there very agreeably. But thanks to a kind providence, which has yoked me with a labourer in my own vineyard when I least expected it. Let us join our forces, let us travel the same road, let us make a joint stock out of our neighbours' purses. Let us rob, let us cheat, let us avail ourselves of every opportunity that may offer of exemplifying our theory and improving our practice in the noble art on which our skill is employed. The proposal was made in so candid a spirit, so like a citizen of the world, untainted with the selfishness of your honest men, that I closed in with it at once. My confidence was surrendered at the first summons to the frankness with which he volunteered his own. We spoke our free hearts each to the other. I dilated all my pilgrimage, and he spake of most disastrous chances, of moving accidents through which he had passed even from his boyish days to this very moment of his ripe and rampant roguery. It appeared that he was on his way from Portalegre, whence he had been obliged to decamp with the utmost expedition on account of a little swindling transaction in which his luck happened not to keep pace with his ingenuity. The habit he wore was sacrilegiously adopted as a cloak to his person and real character, since he thought it safest to be near the church, however far from God. Thus did we two share all our counsel and pledge our brothers' vows, till we grew together like a double cherry, and determined, with two seeming bodies but one heart, to incorporate our voices and minds in some master stroke at Merida. If it took, well and good; if not, we had only to cut and run. From this moment, community of goods, that pure and simple feature of patriarchal life, was enacted as a law between us. Moralez, it is true, for that was my fellow traveller's name, did not find himself in the most splendid condition possible. His funds were limited to 5 or 6 ducats, with a few little articles in a bag. I therefore was the moneyed man of the firm. But then there was brass in his forehead for an inexhaustible coinage, and the seeming of a saint when he played the devil most. So on we journeyed on the ride and tie principle, and arrived in humble cavalcade at Merida. We put up at an inn near the skirts of the town, where my comrade changed his dress. When he had rigged himself in layman's attire, we took a turn up and down to reconnoitre the ground, and see if we could pick out some opportunity of labouring in our vocation. Had it been our good fortune to have lived before Homer, that old apologist for sharping by wholesale would have dignified our excursion with a simile. Not half so keen, fierce vultures of the chase, stoop from the mountains on the feathered race, etc. To descend into plain prose, we were ruminating on the chapter of accidents, and hammering out some theme for the employment of our industry, when we espied a grey-headed old gentleman in the street, sword in hand, defending himself against 3 men who were thrusting at him with all their might and main. The unfairness of the match was what stuck in my throat, so that, flying with the spirit of a prize fighter to see fair play, I made common cause with the old man. Moralez followed up my blows. We proved ourselves a match for the 3 assailants, and put them completely to the rout. Our rescued friend was profuse in his acknowledgments. We are in rapture, said I, at our good luck in being here so seasonably for your assistance. But let us at least know to whom we have been so fortunate as to be serviceable, and what inducement those three men could possibly have for their murderous attempt. Gentlemen, replied he, my obligations are too great to hesitate about satisfying your curiosity. My name is Jerome de Moyadas, a gentleman of this town, living on my means. One of these cutthroat rascals from whom you have rescued me professes to be in love with my daughter. He asked her of me in marriage within these few days, and for want of gaining my consent in a quiet way, has just attempted to force himself into my daughter's good graces by sending me into the other world. And may we take the liberty, rejoined I, of inquiring further why you were so obdurate to the proposals of this enamoured swain? I will explain the whole to you at once, said he. I had a brother, a merchant in this town. His name was Austin. 2 months ago he happened to be at Calatrava, and took up his abode with his correspondent, Juan Velez de la Membrilla. They got to be as loving as turtles, and my brother, to clench the connection, engaged my daughter Florence to his good friend's son, not doubting but he had influence enough with me to redeem his pledge when he returned to Merida. Accordingly, he no sooner opened himself on this subject than I consented out of pure fraternal affection. He sent Florence's picture to Calatrava, but alas, he did not live to put the finishing hand to his own work. We laid him with his forefathers 3 weeks ago. On his deathbed he besought me not to dispose of my girl, but in favour of his correspondent's son. I satisfied his mind on that point, and this is the reason why I have refused Florence to the suitor by whom I was assaulted, though the match would have been a very desirable one. But my word is my idol, and we are in daily expectation of Juan Velez de la Membrilla's heir, who is to be my son-in-law, though I know no more of him nor of his father neither than if they were just imported from an undiscovered island. But I beg pardon, this is an old man's garrulity. Yet you yourselves led me into the scrape. This tale did I swallow with a greedy ear, and pouncing at once upon a part to play, which my fruitful imagination suggested, I put on an air of inordinate surprise, and ventured at all hazards to lift my eyes upward to a purer region. Then turning to my father-in-law with an expression of feeling which nothing but hypocrisy could personate, Ah, Signor de Moyadas, is it possible that, on my arrival at Merida, I should enjoy the heartfelt triumph of rescuing from foul assassination the honoured parent of my peerless love? This exclamation produced all the astonishment it was levelled to excite in the old citizen. Even Morales himself stared like an honest man, and showed by his face that there was a degree of impudence to which his conceptions had not hitherto risen. What! Do not my ears deceive me? Exclaimed the old gentleman. And are you really the son of my brother's correspondent? Really and truly, Signor Jerome de Moyadas, rejoined I with impregnable effrontery, and a hug round his neck that had nearly sent him after his brother. Behold the selected mortal of his species, to whose arms the adorable Florence is devoted. But these nuptial anticipations, transporting as they are, must yield to the anguish of my soul for the demise of their founder. Poor Austin! He is gone, and we must all follow. I should be ingratitude personified if my heart was not lacerated and rent by the death of a man to whom I owe all my hopes of bliss. At the term of this period I squeezed good Jerome's weazened once more, and drew the back of my hand across my eyes to wipe away the tears it had not been convenient to shed. Morales, who by this time had conned over the pretty pickings to be made out of this juggle, was not wanting to play his under part. He passed himself off for my servant, and improved upon his master in lamentation for the untimely death of Signor Austin. My honoured master Jerome, exclaimed he, what a loss have you sustained since your brother is no more! He was such an honest man. Honest men are not to be met with every day. A superfine sample of commerce, a dealer in friendship without a percentage, a dealer in merchandise without an underhand advantage, a dealer who dealt as dealers very seldom do deal. We had our hands to play against a man who was a novice at the game, simple and cullible, so far from smelling out the rat, he took his stink for a nosegay. And why, said he, did you not come straight to my house? It was not friendly to put up at an inn. On the footing we are likely to be upon, there should be none of those punctilios. Sir, said Morales, helping me out of the scrape, my master is a little too much given to stand upon ceremony, though to be sure, in the present instance, he is in some degree excusable for declining to appear before in this uncouth trim. We have been robbed upon the road, and have lost all our travelling equipage. My lad, interrupted I, has let the cat out of the bag, Signor de Moyadas. This unlucky accident has prevented me from paying my respects sooner. True love is diffident, nor could I venture in this garb into the presence of a mistress who was unacquainted with my person. I was therefore waiting the return of a servant whom I have sent to Calatrava. Such a trifle, rejoined the old man, must not deprive us of your company, and I insist upon it that you make my house your home from this very moment. With such sort of importunity he forced me into his family, but as we were on our way, the pretended robbery was a natural topic of conversation, and I should have made light of my baggage, though the loss was very considerable, had not Florence's picture unluckily formed a part of the booty. The old codger chuckled at that, and observed that such a loss was easily repaired. The original was worth 500 per cent, more than the copy. To make me amends, as soon as we got home, he called his daughter, a girl of not more than 16, with a person to have reclaimed a libertine, if beauty ever possessed that power except in romance. You behold, said he, the bale of goods my late brother has consigned to you. Oh, my good sir, exclaimed I in an impassioned tone, words are not wanting to assure me that this must be the lovely Florence. Those bewitching features are engraven on my memory, their impression is indelible on my heart. If the portrait I have lost, the mere outline of these embodied charms, could kindle passion by its cold and lifeless likeness, judge what must be my agitation, my transport at this moment. Such language is too flattering to be sincere, said Florence, nor am I so weak and vain as to be persuaded that my merits warrant it. That is right, interchange your fine speeches, my children. This was a good-natured encouragement from the father, who at once left me alone with his daughter, and taking Morales aside, said to him, my friend, those who made so free with your baggage doubtless did not stand upon any ceremony with your money. Very true, sir, answered my colleague. An overpowering band of robbers poured down upon us near Castil Blazo, and left us not a rag but what we carry on our backs. But we are in momentary expectation of receiving bills of exchange, and then we shall appear once more like ourselves. While you are waiting for your bills of exchange, replied the old man, taking a purse out of his pocket, here are 100 pistoles with which you may do as you please. Oh, sir, rejoined Morales, as if he were shocked, my master will never take them. You do not know him. Heaven and earth, he is a man of the nicest scruples in money matters. Not one of your shabby fellows, always sponging upon his friends, and ready to take up money wherever he can get it. Running in debt is ratsbane to him. If he is to beg his bread or go into an hospital, why there is an end of it, but as for borrowing, he will never be reduced to that. So much the better, said the good Burgess, I value him the more for his independence. Running in debt is a mean thing, it ought to be ratsbane to him and everybody else. Your people of quality, to be sure, may plead prescription in their favour. There's a sort of privileged swindling, not incompatible with high honour in high life. If tradesmen were to be paid, they would be too nearly on a level with their employers. But as your master has such upright principles, heaven forbid they should be violated in this house. Since any offer of pecuniary assistance would hurt his feelings, we must say no more about it. As the point seemed to be settled, the purse was for steering its course back again into the pocket. But my provident partner laid hold of Signor de Moyadas by the arm, and delayed the convoy. Stay, sir, said he, whatever aversion my master may have to borrowing on a general principle, and considered as borrowing, yet there is a light in which, with good management, he may be brought to look kindly on your 100 pistoles. In fact, it is only in a mercantile point of view, as an affair of debtor and creditor between strangers, that he holds this formal doctrine. But he is free and easy enough where he is on a family footing. Why, there is his own father. It is only ask and have, and he does ask and have accordingly. Now you are going to be a second father to him, and are fairly entitled to be put on the same confidential footing. He is a young man of nice discrimination, and will doubtless think you entitled to the compliment. By thus shifting his ground, Moralez got possession of the old gentleman's purse. As for the girl and myself, we were engaged in a little agreeable flirting, but were soon joined by our honoured parent, who interrupted our tete-a-tete. He told Florence how much he was obliged to me, and expressed his gratitude to myself in terms which left no doubt of our being a very happy family. I made the most of so favourable a disposition by telling the good man that if he would bestow on me an acknowledgment the nearest to my heart, he must hasten my marriage with his daughter. My eagerness was not taken amiss. He assured me that in 3 days at latest I should be a happy bridegroom, and that instead of 6,000 ducats, the fortune he had promised to give my wife, he would make it up 10, as a substantial proof how deeply he felt himself indebted to me for the service I had rendered him. Here we were, therefore, quite at home with our good friend Jerome de Moyadas, sumptuously entertained, and catching every now and then a vista vision of 10,000 ducats, with which we proposed to march off abruptly from Merida. Our transports, however, were not without their alloy. It was by no means improbable that within 3 days the bona fide son of Juan Velez de la Membrilla might come and interrupt our sport. This fear had for its foundation more than the weakness of our nerves. On the very next morning, a sort of clodpole, with a portmanteau across his shoulders, knocked at the door of Florence's father. I was not at home at the time, but my colleague had to bear the brunt of it. Sir, said the rustic to our sagacious friend, I belong to the young gentleman at Calatrava, who is to be your son-in-law, to Signor de la Membrilla. We have both just come off our journey. He will be here in an instant, and sent me forward to prepare you for his arrival. Hardly had these unaccountable tidings been announced, when the master appeared in person, which stretched the old fellow's blinkers into a stare, and put Moralez a little to the blush. Young Pedro was what we call a tall fellow of his inches. He began at once paying his compliments to the master of the house, but the good man did not give him time to finish his speech, and turning towards my partner in iniquity, asked what was the meaning of all this. Hereupon Moralez, whose power of face was not to be exceeded by any human impudence, boldly asserted our identity, and said to the old gentleman, Sir, these 2 men here before you belong to the gang which pillaged us on the highway. I have a perfect recollection of their features, and in particular could swear to him who has the effrontery to call himself the son of Signor Juan Velez de la Membrilla. The old citizen gulped down the lies of Moralez like nectar, and told the intruders, on the supposition of their being the impostors, Gentlemen, you are come the day after the fair. The trick was a very good one, but it will not pass. The enemy has taken the ground before you. Pedro de la Membrilla has been under this roof since yesterday. Have all your wits about you, answered the young man from Calatrava. You are nursing a viper in your bosom. Be assured that Juan Velez de la Membrilla has neither chick nor child but myself. And what relation is the hangman to you? Replied the old dupe. You are better known than liked in this house. Can you look this young man in the face, or can you deny that you robbed his master? If I were anywhere but under your roof, rejoined Pedro in a rage, I would punish the insolence of this scoundrel who fancies to pass me off for a highwayman. He is indebted for his safety to your presence, which puts a curb upon my collar. Good sir, pursued he, you are grossly imposed on. I am the favoured youth to whom your brother Austin has promised your daughter. Is it your pleasure for me to produce the whole correspondence with my father on the subject of the impending match? Will you be satisfied with Florence's picture sent me by him as a present a little while before his death? No, put in the old burgess crustily, the picture will work just as strongly on my conviction as the letters. I am perfectly aware by what chance they all fell into your hands, and if you will take a stupid fellow's advice, Merida will soon be rid of such rubbish. A quick march may save you a trouncing. This is beyond all bearing, screamed out the young royster with an overwhelming vehemence. My name shall never be stolen from me, and assumed by a common cheat with impunity, neither shall my person be confounded with that of a freebooter. There are those in this town who can identify me. They are forthcoming, and shall expose the fallacy by which you are prejudiced against me. With this assurance he withdrew, attended by his servant, and Morales kept possession of the field. The adventure had even the effect of determining Jerome de Moyadas to fix the wedding for the very time being. Accordingly, he went his way for the purpose of giving the necessary orders for the celebration. Though my colleague in knavery was well enough pleased to see Florence's father in a humour so pat for our purposes, he was not without certain scruples of conscience about our safety. It was to be feared lest the probable proceedings of Pedro might be followed up by awkward consequences, so that he waited impatiently for my arrival to make me acquainted with what had occurred. I found him over head and ears in a brown study. What is the matter, my friend? Said I. Seemingly there is something upon your mind. Indeed there is, and something that will be minded, answered he. At the same time he let me into the affair. Now you may judge, added he after a pause, whether we have not some food for reflection. It is your ill star, rash contriver, which has thrown us into this perplexity. The idea, it must be confessed, was full of fire and ingenuity. Had it answered in the application, your renown would have been emblazoned in the chronicles of our fraternity. But according to present appearances, the run of luck is against us, and my counsels incline to a prudent avoidance of all explanations by quietly sneaking off with the market penny we have made of the silly old fellow's credulity. Master Morales, replied I to this desponding speech, you give way to difficulties with more haste than good speed. Such pusillanimity does but little honour to Don Matthias de Cordel and the other gallant blades with whom you were affiliated at Toledo. After serving a campaign under such experienced generals, it is not soldierly to shrink from the perils of the field. For my part, I am resolved to fight the battles of these heroes over again, or in more vulgar phrase, to prove myself a chip from the old blocks. The precipice which makes your head turn giddy only stiffens my sinews to surmount the toils of the way, and push forward to the end of our career. If you arrive at your journey's end in a whole skin, said my companion, I will myself be your biographer and set your fame far above all the parallels of Plutarch. Just as Morales was finishing this learned allusion, Jerome de Moradas came in. You shall be my son-in-law this very evening, said he. Your servant must have given you an account of what has just passed. What say you to the impudence of the scoundrel who wanted to make me believe that he was the son of my brother's correspondent? Honoured sir, answered I, with a melancholy air, and in a tone of voice the most insinuating that ever cajoled the easy faith of a dotard, I feel within me that it is not in my nature to carry on an imposition without betraying it in my countenance. It now becomes necessary to make you a sincere confession. I am not the son of Juan Velez de la Membrilla. What is it you tell me? Interrupted the old man, out of breath with surprise, and out of his wits with apprehension. So then you are not the young man to whom my brother— For pity's sake, sir, interrupted I in my turn, condescend to give me a hearing patiently to the end of my story. For these 8 days have I doted to distraction on your daughter, and this dotage, this distraction, has riveted me to Merida. Yesterday, after having rescued you from your danger, I was making up my mind to ask her of you in marriage, but you gave a check to my passion and put a tie upon my tongue by the intelligence that she was destined for another. You told me that your brother on his deathbed enjoined you to give her to Pedro de la Membrilla, that your word was pledged, and that you were the sworn vassal and bondman of your veracity. These circumstances, it must be owned, were overwhelming in the extreme, and my romantic passion, at the last gasp of its despair, gained breath by the stratagem with which the god of love inspired me. I must at the same time declare that a trick is at the best but a mean thing, and, however sanctified by the motive, my conscience recoiled at the delusion. Yet I could not but think that my pardon would be granted on the discovery, when it should come out, that I was an Italian prince, travelling through this country as a private gentleman. My father reigned supreme over a nest of inaccessible valleys lying between Switzerland, the Milanese, and Savoy. It could not but occur to me that you would be agreeably surprised when I should unfold to you my birth, and having married Florence under my fictitious character, should announce to her the rank she had attained, with all the rapture of an enamoured husband, and all the stage effect of a hero in tragedy or romance. But heaven, pursued I, with an hypocritical softening down of my accents, has visited my sins by cutting me off from such a perennial stream of joy. Pedro de la Membrilla was introduced upon the scene. He must have his name back again, whatever the restitution may cost me. Your promise binds you hand and foot to fix upon him for your son-in-law. It is your duty to give him the preference without taking my rank and station into the account, without mercy on the forlorn condition to which you are going to reduce me. To be sure, it might be said, but then I should say it, who ought not to say it, that your brother had only the authority of an uncle over your daughter, that you are her father, and that there is more right and reason in discharging an actual debt of gratitude towards your preserver than in being mealy-mouthed about a verbal promise which would press but lightly on the conscience of the most scrupulous casuist. Yes, without doubt, that argument is indisputable, exclaimed Jerome de Moyadas, and on that ground there can no longer be any question between you and Pedro de la Membrilla. If my brother Austin were still living, he would not think it bad morality to give the preference to a man who has saved my life, nor a bad speculation to close the bargain with a prince who has not disdained to court our alliance. It were an absolute suicide on the part of all my opening prospects, the frantic desperation of an acknowledged incurable, not to dispose of my daughter so illustriously, not to solicit your highness's acceptance of her hand. And yet, sir, resumed I, these things are not to be determined without due deliberation. Look at your own interests and safety with a microscopic eye, for though the illustrious channel through which my blood has flowed for ages— You are scarcely serious, interrupted he, in supposing that I can hesitate for a moment. No, may it please your highness, it is my most humble and earnest request that you will deign on this very evening to honour the happy Florence with your hand. Well then, said I, be it so. Go yourself and be the bearer of the unlooked-for tidings. Announce to her the brilliant career of her exalted destiny. While the good citizen was putting his best foot foremost to instill into his daughter that she had made the conquest of a prince, Morales, who had taken in the whole conversation with greedy ear, threw himself upon his knees before me, and did homage in these bantering terms: Most potent, grave, and august Italian prince, son of a sovereign, supreme over a nest of inaccessible valleys, lying between Switzerland, the Milanese, and Savoy, permit me to humble myself at your highness's feet in humble acknowledgment of the ecstasy into which you have thrown me. By the honour of a swindler, you are one of the wonders of our world. I always thought myself the first man in the line, but in good truth I doff my bonnet before you, whose genius seems to supersede the lessons of experience. Then you are no longer uneasy about the result, said I to my colleague in iniquity. Oh, as to that, not in the least, answered he. I no longer care a fig for Master Pedro. Let him come as soon as he pleases, we are a match for him. Here we are then, Morales and myself, safe seated on the saddle and rising in our stirrups. We even went so far as to begin settling the course we should pursue with the fortune on which we reckoned so securely, that if it had already been in our pockets, we could not have chuckled more triumphantly over the proverb of a bird in the hand. Yet we were not in actual possession, which is more than legal right, and the sequel of the adventure proved to us that many things fall out between the cup and the lip. We very soon saw the young man of Calatrava returning. He was accompanied by 2 citizens and by an alguazil, whose dignity was as much supported by his whiskers and by the lowering overcast of his swarthy aspect as by the weight of his official character. Florence's father was of the party. Signor de Moyadas, said Pedro to him, here are 3 honest people come to answer for me. They are acquainted with my person and can tell you who I am. Yes, undoubtedly, exclaimed the alguazil, I can depose to the fact. I certify to all those whom it may concern that you are known to me. Your name is Pedro, and you are the only son of Juan Velez de la Membrilla. Whosoever dares to maintain the contrary is an impostor. I believe you implicitly, master alguazil, said the good creature Jerome de Moyadas rather dryly. Your evidence is gospel to me, as well as that of these fair and honest tradesmen you have brought with you. I am fully satisfied that the young gentleman on whose behalf you come is the only son of my brother's correspondent. But what is that to me? I am no longer in the humour to give him my daughter. So there is an end of that. End of Book 5, Chapter 1, Part 1.